Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for April 2023. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, was a tie, so I chose technology. The level of technological advancement in a fantasy world is often a contentious topic, especially when heroes and villains can get their hands on things that the average person may never even know about. What kind of tech are we comfortable injecting into our worlds? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Brandon.
Hello.
Genocider.
Hello.
And Lumpy Spuds.
Hello.
So, D&D is, I mean, it's several different worlds, I suppose. But when I think most of us think of D&D in 5th edition, we're thinking Forgotten Realms, and I think that's mostly a traditional fantasy, a medieval high fantasy world. But occasionally we get some fun little extra technology we can kind of play with, and in fact, the Dungeon Master's Guide includes, as some of its variant rules, the inclusion of firearms. This is page 267. Explosives and alien technology, and stat blocks for all that stuff. So I like the fact that they baked it in there as a optional variant rule if we wanted to introduce those kind of tools and weapons in our campaign. So just as a preliminary ask, I would like to ask all of you if you have used, and usually when I'm thinking about technology, I guess I'm looking at it from a weaponry point of view, but technically it can be anything. You can introduce a airship, or some kind of, I don't know, just really any invention that's not technically magical in nature. Although we can also talk about how, what's the famous quote about any sufficient advanced technology isn't really different from magic if you really think about it. So I guess I'm going to open it up to asking all of you if you have used any pieces of technology in your worlds, or if you are strictly against technology. Lumpy, I want to start with you.
Yeah, I play a modified Eberron campaign like setting. So what I've done is I've taken the whole Goblin Empire that fell tens of thousands of years in the past, and they are the only ones that developed the technology of firearms. So only goblins in this world are allowed to use firearms. But it works really great. So like it's a kind of if a player does create a goblin character, they have the choice of instead of a crossbow, they can get a gun to start off.
So would that be like how elves have certain like longsword proficiencies or something, where they just have innate training of how to use that device?
Yeah, how I kind of flavor it is that goblins have like the nimble fingers that let them actually do the gears to make the guns and everything. So I have them usually get rid of one other skill, and it's been a few different ones. I haven't found the perfect skill to get rid of to give them the gun proficiency yet. But I've been trying out some different things, and all of them seem to work adequately well.
Do you use the firearms from the Dungeon Master's Guide as they're statted out, or do you have your own rule set?
Now that I looked up some other ones as well, and I found some really great expanded ones. There's like a blunderbuss, which I let them use two different kinds of ammo for that. Have you ever seen the anime Outlaw Star? If you've seen that, main character in that has this gun that has like, I don't know, a whole bunch of different types of ammo that he can use in it, and each of them are completely fundamentally different. And that's kind of how I flavor the guns in my Eberron world. They'll shoot magical shots sometimes. Other times they're potions that can be shot out of a gun,
Oh, snap.
things like that. Yeah, it's really fun stuff.
Now, see, that sounds like a whole like subclass that you suddenly concocted. Really to like fire potions at people.
Well,
Uh,
you have an artificer in the group, and they can do whatever kinds of ammo they want to.
that'd be pretty cool. And that's specifically Emberron, you said?
Yeah, modified Eberron. I don't follow strictly the whole campaign settings guidelines or anything.
So from what I remember, Eberron was introduced in 4th edition, I think. And specifically as a more technological, or I guess actually just a more advanced world in general, because a lot of the even the magic is more widely used in Eberron. So they have like trains and shit, but I think the trains might actually run on magic. But yeah, so tech,
Yeah,
and they had the whole race is Warforged also. So clearly for tech savvy folks, Eberron kind of fits the bill pretty well.
in fact, on the trains, it's a lightning rail train, and I had a heist on a train one time, and
Yeah.
boy, my players loved that.
Yeah. Everyone sounds really cool. I remember when, not to go off on a tangent, but when I was choosing which campaigns to play when we were ended up choosing Rhyme, I think Eberron was in the running. It kind of fell behind because it wasn't actually technically a campaign, right? We just had the source book, so I would have had to do a lot of extra work to actually come up with a campaign. But I did really like that world, and it felt different enough, and I liked that the story was not as deep, I guess, as Faerun is at this point, and yet still had some really good stuff to build off of. All right, that's a completely different tangent. Technology, Genocider, tell me about tech.
Never used it. I think the furthest we ever went was like cannons, like siege cannons.
Mm.
Mm.
Which,
We had
medieval weaponry could count as technically that's whatever level of technology you're at. I guess that would be like trebuchets and catapults, but that'd be pretty strictly high fantasy, I think.
yeah.
Do you have
If
anything
there was
against it?
or anything, then they were like powered by magic or like psi or whatever. I don't have anything against it, and I like kind of like what Lumpy was saying. Like certain races having access to it, like your gnomes or your goblins or something. You go to their town and it's all teched up and weird and kooky and stuff. I think that's a fun idea and it's fine. It just never happened.
I do think that I don't. You'll have to correct me if anybody knows Forgotten Realms more than me, which should be most of you. I know that the gnomes in the Dragonlance setting were the tech ones, kind of like what Lumpy was talking about for goblins. That's their whole shtick. Is gnomes are big inventors, and they invent all these like the airships and little mechanized creatures and like everything. It's not super to where it's very prevalent in the world, I don't think, but it's like if you go to a gnome, like what you're saying, if you go to a gnome town or something, it's all tech stuff, and any kind of gnome would be just the engineer. I wonder if that's kind of racist thinking too. That like only this one race is like really good at technology. Kind of reductive thinking, I think, to divide that all. I guess the way to do that would be to maybe make it a cultural thing, like a region would be like super advanced, maybe, which would maybe comprise different races. But yeah, that's that's very old school fantasy building. I feel like too is to have it be the race. Brandon, tell me about technology in your games.
Yeah, I'm very limited, unfortunately. None of the campaigns that I've run or played in have had any examples of laser guns and grenades. Spelljammer hasn't really interested me, and I think that's probably the next closest correlation to things.
I have an argument, though. I don't think Spelljammer is very technologically advanced.
Well, and here's the thing. It is so far down my list, I haven't even thumbed through the book, right? So it's like very unfair. I'm judging a book by its cover when I say that. Because, the spaceship that is essentially a flying nautical boat
yes,
isn't necessarily technologically advanced. The fact that you add space to boat probably is where the feeling comes from. So, yeah, I don't have a good experience there. I think the furthest that we've gotten, I had a player in my Tomb campaign, the first run through, that was playing a pirate, and was coming in at a certain level. It was like 7, I think, at the time, and wanted to have access to firearms. And I was like, okay, the world doesn't generally have firearms. I think I was piggybacking off a lot of Critical Role stuff of how limited access it is, but it's not unheard of. And if anybody's going to know how to operate gunpowder, it's probably a pirate. Like, it seems to make sense. So let's see how we can make this work. And what I like is tools with a consequence, or like successes with consequences, or failures with consequences also. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, you can have a failure that worked out in your favor still, or successes that don't necessarily mean you get everything you wanted. So one of his like flaws was fear of fire, because he carries around the gunpowder that he needs to in a pouch. So he was able to role play it really well. He was able to use it really well. We used the rules for the guns pretty straightforward. He had a pistol and a musket. We used the damage things. All that went really well. But I think I had picked up like a misfire table from somewhere, so that if he rolled a 1, there was another check basically that wasn't designed to be a huge consequence, but it's the risk. Like, you're using a fairly strong weapon
that has complicated moving parts.
yeah. And he really, perception was that he really enjoyed it at the time. And it ended up being a really fun player character throughout the campaign.
So if I assume he started with those weapons. Hey, Lucas, way to join.
I'm late. Sorry, it's just
Fashionably.
I'm hopefully not too late, but just let me know if it's. I'll catch up.
I will play you in a moment. Did you do limited ammunition at all? Did they just always have ammo for it?
Let's see. It was kind of his gunpowder / powder keg thing was essentially spell component-y for me, in the sense that I don't necessarily keep super close track of spell components. Once in a blue moon, we stop at a place, you say, hey, I'd like to get more spell components. Awesome. You got spell components. Like, you made an effort.
Yeah.
That's how we kind of handle the gunpowder. He did have, I'm actually looking at his character sheet right now. He had brought enough ammo with him to satisfy the needs of where we were. We were past Omu and into the dungeon at this point. And so it's a little bit like Rye in the Empire of the Ghouls campaign, where he's taking shots in like close quarter spaces and stuff. But that was part of the fun. You know, it was the risk of, hey, I could do this, but it's going to potentially ricochet or these other things. So it was a lot of fun to try to play with. I think my style of D&D is more, I don't even know if I could describe it well. It's probably more Tolkien oriented, with a little bit of like, I'm okay with high fantasy ish stuff. It has to just make sense to me, and I know that's really selfish, right? But at the end of the day, as I'm playing, if they're like, hey, I'd really like to have a bazooka, I'm gonna be like, yeah, I don't think that's gonna be in this game. Now we can try to find some equivalent of a bazooka. Like, we can come together and try to work out.
What is a bazooka if not a wand of fireballs? Like, you know,
absolutely,
like,
right?
That's
like,
one of
that's
the arguments
thing.
I could make is like, you could just retheme a magic item, you know, come up with a way that it recharges or something, or limited use per day is the big question. You know, instead of having ammunition, it just magically recharges once in a while. But yeah, I mean, a bazooka is just a wand of fireballs that's just really big and hilarious. So you could almost just treat technology like magic items.
Well, okay, and so right there, you sold me. I'd probably allow something like that to happen, and that's the argument that I usually run with.
In terms of working out the balance of it, because I think that's part of the big fear. Is somebody says like, well, can my character carry around an M16? And you're just like, that seems a little broken. Like, I don't know like how we would balance that. And to me, I would just look at magic items as being the main, and the stat blocks that are already in the Dungeon Master's Guide for regular weapons, and just kind of use that as a baseline. And for me, it's kind of more rule of cool. Lucas, you actually have good timing. We're still going around the room doing our opening thoughts on using technology in our D&D campaigns. What do you think?
The only real technology I'd consider, or that I do that feels relevant, because I'm not doing the antimatter rifles or whatever, would be gunpowder and guns. And my stance on that is, if it's rare, because it's weird, because it's not about historicism, because there were guns in like medieval times, let alone Renaissance times. But my big problem isn't they're unrealistic or they take away the fun. It's that I want to keep this sort of pseudo very medieval setting where if guns are prevalent, there are no knights, there aren't horses, there aren't people in armor with swords and spears. Maybe magic can balance things, but then it'd just be magic and guns.
Yeah.
I think, and
that sounds
it's
cool
hard. No, that'd be very cool, but that's just kind of not what I'm doing. I like the idea of swords and stuff and armor. But I mean, my approach isn't. I had a friend, and I was talking to her about. She runs like a Pathfinder game, but it's similar. She says like, "Oh, for our setting, which is like a modern world with internet and stuff, we just said they're not going to be guns, so that way we can still have wizards and swashbucklers and stuff, and people with swords." But I'm like,
interesting.
Not that it has to be like super faithfully historical, but like that just seems like it breaks immersion. Like it has to be cohesive, in my opinion. Like, why aren't there guns? Or if there are guns, then why aren't people using them? But here's my biggest issue. It really was really cool.
I mean, you mentioned how they were like more rare at certain time periods of history too. So it could
not
be
reliable. They want us reliable.
Sure, and that could be something that's like, well, guns are. Yeah, they're very rare. The ability to make a gun is extremely rare. The knowledge of how to operate such a weapon is extremely advanced. And
it's not like an M16 or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. And maybe they're kind of shitty compared to, what people have been using for centuries. They're like, why would I kind of use this ridiculous...
They're better than a sling, but like they're not like invalidating everything and anything. But actually, I saw a really good video that made me feel better about guns in D&D because... He basically is like a weapons. I follow a lot of weapons and armor guys, historical, and he pointed out like, yeah, a gun would boom, you're dead, but if you get stabbed with a knife, you're dead. I always feel weird saying you got stabbed by a spear and you took 10 damage, and I know like, well, that's a quarter of their health. Oh, you got stabbed in the shoulder, or you got stabbed but they miss your vitals, or you got stabbed but you shrug it off. That's as unrealistic as getting just shot 10 times and shrugging it off. A barbarian taking an axe to the chest and shrugging it off.
Yeah, if you want to talk about realistic damage, D&D, like fuck that. They don't like. How much health does the average player character have at like level 5? Like they can fall from whatever height. Like what is the calculated height that people can fall from? Like their gravity isn't even like a realistic thing in the D&D world. I feel like
in the argument that it's not realistic because boom, you're dead from a gun. Well. You get stabbed once in like any part of your body really with a knife or a sword or a spear, you're done.
Yeah,
and you're not gonna heal up on a long rest. But we accept that, and that's a good suspension of disbelief for this kind of thematic setting where we're heroes. We get in fights all the time.
Yeah, I think that the balance part of it is easier to swallow than the thematic part of it for most of us because like I mentioned in the beginning that there are rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, variant rules for including firearms, and they have just reasonable damage values. That's like, a hunting rifle does 2d10 damage. That's pretty massive, but nothing to where it's gonna like just blow people away or something. And they all have like the reload thing and the two-handed. Like they try to basically balance in.
So I'm frankly speaking optimistic about the two guns they showed in the 1D&D summit or whatever the hell. Did you remember that, right?
I have not.
Well, basically, they briefly, when they had that one creator summit or whatever, they went over some of the new changes they're implementing, and one of them is in the standard player's handbook list of weapons. They're adding pistol and rifle.
Oh, interesting.
And a rifle's like 1d12.
Okay.
So it's just straight up in line with a normal weapon.
Yeah.
Plus it has the properties and blah, blah, blah.
They're just like, fuck it. You want to carry... Because at that point, it literally is just cosmetic. Right? I mean, function... Unless your DM cares about ammunition specifically and like, no, we're only going to give... Like, this loot pile only has bolts, which can't be used with a bow... because they require arrows and can't, unless your DM's being nitty gritty about ammunition, then it is functionally cosmetic, which I'm kind of, I mean, again, everybody's got their own technology settings, but I'd be kind of fine with assuming somebody was like, yeah, I want to be a cool gunslinger in this world, to be like, all right, it's going to be pretty rare. Everybody's going to kind of ooh and ah over your stuff. But you're pretty much balanced in line with everybody else, and it's just more of a cosmetic thing.
Personally, I don't like the idea of cowboys. That just seems like you're in the wrong genre. But you can be like a medieval gunman with your musket, whatever.
Arquebus, is that what's the more medieval?
There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that Wizards of the Coast, their stance on this gun thing, I don't think they said this, but the fact is, they're putting guns in because everyone wants guns and they use guns.
Yeah.
That's like the number one third-party thing they add to weapons or whatever, guns.
Right.
So they thought we might as well get ahead of the curve. Second off, they claim, and this is fun stuff, guns have always been canon to every last official D&D setting. Even Theros, I don't know about that, but that's their excuse.
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure.
You got to think that I can buy that in Faerun or Forgotten Realms or whatever. I'm pretty skeptical about what the other ones.
Yeah, I think we talked about and Lumpy mentioned Emberron as being definitely one that's you'd find a lot more technology stuff. Yeah, I
totally agree with you, but yes, it is for me, or I think for other people, it's 100% more aesthetic than mechanical balance. Not to write that off entirely.
For some reason, it seems to carry a lot of weight, though, when you say, I have a gun. And I'm interested if it's because of our perception as people that, somebody walks in with a sword. It's like, oh, that guy's kind of weird. Somebody walks with a gun. It's like, oh, that guy's got a gun. You know what I mean?
My perception is drastically different if I see a sword versus a gun. If I see a sword, I'm like, oh, that guy's kind of maybe weird, but also maybe kind of cool. If I see a gun, I'm just like, oh, this guy's an asshole. I don't want to be involved. Like,
so I was thinking for some reason of a podcast that I've been listening to, Dungeons and Dads or Dungeons and Daddies or whatever. And Freddie Wong is one of the players. And one of the things that happens in this podcast is they end up with a gun. And it's like, it is for them, it holds the same gravitas. It is, I'm going to bring I think the description was like, I'm going to bring my human gun out and like point it at them. And that's its own thing. It's like a human gun. There are humans. They are human. Like, why is this a big deal? But it's the fact that they're trying to put weight behind this is a more powerful thing than these other things. When, you had made the comment about the thing that shoots fireballs. I mean, that's basically a necklace of fireballs that is in a pea shooter or something. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's not that big a deal.
We're putting our real life modern perceptions into these games, because literally somebody could walk around aimed with their wand of fireballs like that, and that is just as deadly to most people in the universe. I think would recognize, like, oh shit, a wand. Like, literally any kind of horrifying thing could come out of that. It could be some kind of death cloud that turns our skin inside out. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but it's gonna be bad news.
I think someone else, I saw this on Twitter a while ago, someone pointed out burning hands, the thing where you blast
it's a fucking flamethrower.
It's a flamethrower.
Yes.
And if you foof someone with a flamethrower, they're not getting back up.
Yeah.
So an automatic pistol, and I know that we were stuck on the firearm side of it, I guess. But
I think when most people think of technology, where we think weaponry, but we can go into the other stuff. But yeah, go ahead.
The thing that says automatic pistol, it says that it does 2d6, and it's 50/150. And for some reason, that doesn't seem as impressive as when you look up Cone of Cold. And Cone of Cold is 8d8 cold damage, right? So it's one of those things that for some reason the gun's like, oh, look out, this guy's got a gun. Meanwhile, the wizard's just like, give me a few seconds.
That's very true. Yeah, Wizard's just like, I am the fucking gun. just finger gun. You don't just do finger guns. You can shoot like fucking magic missiles out. It is a weird thing. I mean, so yeah, balance wise, it's kind of silly. Like, it is, because guns aren't really any, I don't think, baseline stronger than any of the magic. And you give your players a necklace of fireballs or something. You just gave them, a bunch of guns basically strapped to a necklace or something. But I do get it that thematically, it's weird, and we are putting our own player perceptions into these worlds, thinking like, oh, we respect the level of a gun, or at least we all should, in terms of what that means and the weight that it carries. And yet, in that fantasy world, people might look at that and be like, that's kind of a interesting piece of technology or something. And then the wizard's like, but then the wizard just walks in the room and they might think, oh, fuck, this guy just could, You know, a wizard walking around should just be the equivalent of somebody walking into a store just fucking loaded down with like grenades and fucking landmines and bazookas on their back. Like, that's really how wizards should be treated in this world. And everybody's like, okay, take a step back. That's the weapon side of it. And I'm going to open the floor. What about any other kind of technology? Because recently I very famously used an entire spaceship in our Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign, the equivalent, a nautiloid, which is kind of a spelljammer vessel. It was baked into that campaign, and I thought this is a great way to do the JRPG thing of giving the players a kind of latter half airship to tool around in as a way to circumvent, doing a lot of random encounters and stuff. How did we feel about, and laser rifles and grenades, obviously we found in there too. Now that was tied, that was not a normal thing you can pick up. You can't go to the Nautiloid store and pick up the latest model. This was, we found a downed spaceship. We had to get a engine core, from another area and bring it there. We had to then deal with the occupants at the time. So there was kind of a quest line involved, but then they gained, functionally an airship for a good while that they couldn't quite pilot themselves though. They just got to kind of tell the pilot where to go. Has anybody used anything like that before?
I've used airships that are just magical boats that fly. But speaking of, if we're talking about other types of technology,
yeah,
I think I don't remember. I can't name off the top of my head, but I like to use toilets.
Keep my world clean.
Well, no, I think it's just like they're not having piss pots, I just, and like also you're buying into it. This isn't like perfectly accurate medieval France or whatever.
There's a funny bit in I was reviewing Keys of the Golden Vault and the museum heist that I liked so much. There's a bit where like the players can go into the restrooms and hide in there until it turns dark and then they can come out. And I was thinking like, does the Forgotten Realms have restrooms? Like, I was really trying to like think about this for a moment. I was like, is this just taking, like, I guess there would be a set, but it literally looked like there were like stalls and urinals almost. And maybe I'm just picturing that because of, modern era, but that
I'll just say, here's the thing is, and I'll shut up because I've been talking a lot.
No, go ahead.
There's always been the technology for a museum, a big room where you store display objects. And there is the technology for public restrooms with stalls, even no matter how far back you go, theoretically. But what are these public restrooms going to be? Stalls with little wooden doors where you have chamber pots?
Hole, yeah. A hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not all about, and yes, spaceships and lasers and guns, but we take it for granted the stuff we want to add because we don't know how they did it back then.
Yeah.
And we don't want them to be doing like chamber pot stuff.
How they did it is that hygiene was completely fucked back then. If you look at like even just 19th century or something, like the urban cities, it was like a cesspool of fucking disease and just nastiness that had to be helped saved by a lot of like modern day plumbing issues and things of that nature, sewer systems.
I think I imagine most of my player characters as Kindles, and they don't have.
Yeah, we're playing action figures.
Like
There's no
that.
real. Yeah. I never have to say my characters go to the bathroom. Yeah, it's TV logic at that point. But do those places exist?
There's Otyugs that eat like poop, I think, and then like dimensional portals. So there's probably like some other planet that's just like always getting dumped on.
I do find that's funny in a lot of dungeons. There's usually some kind of waste section. They account for that, and it's usually some kind of monster in there.
My favorite dungeon area or terrain of any urban city is the sewers.
Yep.
But why is there a sewer if it's not a plumbing system? Or even the Greeks or ancient Rome had sewers and plumbing and stuff.
True. Yep.
But after the Roman Empire fell and it was just Western Europe, there was you tossed out your chamber pot from the window and there was shit and piss in the street.
Yeah.
I haven't played in the campaign much. I did get a chance to play it once, Dragon Heist, I think. I listened to Chris Perkins do a section of it, and in one of them there was like a submarine that was connected to it. And I just remember thinking, like, at the time I was like, oh man, that sounds so cool, because I'm imagining this fantasy, maybe steampunk like submarine, and what would that be like? And for some reason it's funny to me because I was just thinking, I was like, that made sense to me, but an automatic pistol in a world like that doesn't make sense again. So and I think that's one of the things, is that if you can flavor it, if you can describe it in a way that makes sense in that world,
Yeah.
I think you can really tie everybody into just accepting it for what it is.
Does this technology exist for some reason? And really, if you look at human history, a lot of technology was invented because of war. So, a lot of submarines were invented, I think, around the time like the U.S. Civil War or something, because they needed ways of getting around the coast, stealthily. So you could tie in levels of technology to the world in some really interesting ways. I always thought, I want to cite two fantasy IPs that I think do a good job of blending technology with their fantasy setting. One of them is the Final Fantasy series. And I'm not, a lot of head nodding. I'm not even the biggest Final Fantasy fan, or have been keeping up very well, but I just know the look and the theme of it has always just had a really cool combination where like magic is always a thing, blades and swords are always a thing, and yet people are carrying around guns, and there's machinery and robots and everything, and that's just the world, and it works. It's so, I think, different from our own world that maybe we just accept it as this unique fantasy world that also has a level of technology that's so far diverged from our own, and it always just looked really cool to me and blended those two things together. And the other thing I would mention is the Pillars of Eternity series takes a more traditional fantasy series and adds basically upgrades it to like Renaissance Age of Sail level. So you've got just naval warfare is a huge thing, and then some and guns. You can do shotguns. I think they do call them blunderbusses, pistols, and then the big rifles, which I think the arquebuses. And they're balanced pretty well, where that game has a whole balance thing where weapons all have different special qualities, and maybe they have like more penetration or something. So there is like some difference between using a gun and using a bow, but like damage wise, they're pretty equivalent. And those are the two I would cite as being, if you're inspired to use technology in your games, check out some that maybe can use them in some interesting ways. What about far advanced technology like that I use in terms of like literally laser rifles or things that are even well beyond ours? Has anybody ever dropped something like that in there?
And I think you should add Star Wars to your list, because everybody has guns, but it's magic and all the badasses have swords. So.
I can answer that. I'm sorry, go Lumpy.
Well, I was going to say that, I actually ran back second edition, I think it was, or first edition. I played Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and that one was a spaceship had crashed somewhere in Faerun, and you had to go inside, and it had like all this great technology, including like laser rifles and stuff like that. After that, I started kind of throwing them hidden in different dungeons here and there in my other campaigns. So yeah, in one of my current campaigns, they found a couple laser rifles in a crashed spaceship. So it's really fun because I also have charts and tables and stuff for if they're trying to decipher a technology, it can go horribly wrong for them. Like they have a laser rifle, they're fiddling with it, it could explode in their hands, and all of a sudden they're taking 10d10 damage.
Do they make a one? And because that's something I actually forgot to mention is I had rules for understanding what the technology was. Do they make the one check and then they kind of unlock the ability to use it, or are you constantly having to make the check every time you want to use it?
Most of the time it's the former. Sometimes it's the latter, depending on the device. But yeah, basically once they figure it out, it's okay. But I give them no bonuses to the roll. It's a straight up D20 on the difficulty of the weapon or item that they're trying to use.
Not even intelligence or something?
I figure it's such a foreign technology, they'd have no idea to even gauge how to work with the thing. So it's just a straight up D20 roll.
Roll the dice. All right. I did have some system. I forgot how I did it, but I think you had to make one check to figure out. I think I involved the check had something to do with how much ammunition it actually had remaining. Like you were literally fiddling with it and you would accidentally like discharge it or something if you fail. I'd have to go back and look at those rules. You reminded me of that. But yeah, so if you found technology that did not normally exist in the world, this was literally like a crashed spaceship, like Easter egg type thing that you found, then yeah, nobody would know how to use it. There's no automatic like, oh yeah, I grew up with, I have guns back in my village or something. It's like, you don't know what the fuck this is. Then you would have to make some kind of check to even be able to do it. And I think at that point, I even tied that into how much finite ammunition you had left. Very much inspired from, I think, the first 2 Fallout games, and maybe the later ones did too. That is an Easter egg. It was like a crash. You just came across like a crashed spaceship, and there was like a dead alien in there, and you could like just find a powerful laser pistol just as a random thing.
I have not used like advanced technology like that in my campaigns because they haven't come across it. But as I was sitting there thinking, there is a section in the final level of Tomb that has the Modrons come out, and I was thinking that it's interesting because I don't think the Modrons have a lot to do necessarily with, and I'm way out of my realm when it comes to lore here, but I don't think they have a lot to do with like technology in the sense of firearms and ammunition and stuff. It's more about keeping the order of things, making sure that they're in a specific how they're supposed to be. But it wouldn't surprise me if something came out of like that that you could use. There was also a section where there was like I don't remember the specifics. There was like a globe thing that went around, and if you manipulated it, sometimes a good thing would happen and sometimes a bad thing would happen. But I think some of that stuff for my campaigns is so fantastical. It's like, here's just the thing, right? There's no explanation of its origin. There's no way to really suss out where it came from. Here's just the thing. And I think that's been the majority of my introduction of otherworldly things into their environment.
It's funny you said lightsabers and stuff. I haven't introduced super tech, not that I can remember off the top of my head, but one of my players, their favorite weapon for their character is a sun sword, and we all just call it the lightsaber.
It is. It totally is. 100%.
Actually, a really solid weapon because it was rare level rarity, so they got it at like early-ish, mid-ish level instead of, but it's still been useful. Like it'll probably be useful to the very end. It's like their signature weapon.
Do they do lightsaber sounds? Because I'd have to do lightsaber sounds.
I can just cut through the floor, right? Or hey, it's a lightsaber. And I don't say, oh yeah, it does 1 million damage and chops through enemies in one hit. It still does normal radiant damage and all that. But it's a lightsaber. So like at that level of magic artifacts and relics and technology and magic items that can teleport you and open dimension doors and whatever.
Yeah.
Do you really need spaceships and time machines? I mean, I don't know. Maybe both. It just seems redundant.
It depends on how prevalent magic is, and I think it would be pretty cool. Again, you could bake it into your world. Like if the people, maybe there were people who were very bad at magic, or culturally were cut off from magic, or racially were cut off from magic, or had some reason not be able to get to magic, and so instead it became a literal arms race. Where they're like, we have to do, and then you could do the whole science versus technology thing, and then you could do, or nature versus tech, and then you can have that faction be your tech faction because they feel like they need something to keep up with everybody who can use magic. I'm probably citing like several fantasy things that have even done this before, but so you've got
Final Fantasy 14, the game I played, where it's like there's a race of people and they couldn't do magic, but they basically got help. They had like an industrial revolution, so now they have like robots and stuff and technology. So they're a big oppressive evil empire.
Yeah, I think that's a cool set dressing for a fantasy world too, is to literally pit the tech with the, and usually of course magic you can flavor as being, oh, we're kind of one with nature and shit, but you don't have to. You could just be like, oh, magic is just destructive and maybe oppressive, and it's the poor people with technology or the rebels fighting back, and it's because this is all we have as this technology. I think that's definitely grounds, but you obviously have to bake that into your world. But that we talked about like why technology exists. That's just one of the reasons, is maybe because not everybody has access to magical abilities, or like in was like the Dragon Age series where it's like magic is almost a curse. where it's like being a mutant in Marvel Comics or something. You have to be born with it, and then if you are hunted down and told like you have to be in this one like school where we basically have to watch you because you could explode into a demon at any point. Like, it's just super not great to be a magic user in that universe, and everybody else can like kind of start using technology.
I really like that idea because, talking about wizards with 8d8 cold damage, that you need to potentially be able to defend yourself against that. Yeah. So how do you do that?
Yeah, this is my burning hands. They got the thing on it.
Yeah, that's good. I like it.
Yeah. And we talked about magic items too. Like, in essence, you can literally retheme any magic. And in fact, I think Chris did this in our high level campaign where my character was like dual wielding crossbows or something, and then one of the things I could do was like I had like a flamethrower thing on the crossbow that I could it was like, I think it actually might have been called a shotgun, I don't actually remember, that essentially did like a cone spray attack and had the stat block of a burning hand spell, because if you just look at every spell, even not even counting Xanathars and some of the later stuff, you can pretty much come up with whatever tech item you want just by using that kind of stuff. The big balancer is somehow figuring out how to limit its uses. If you're literally going to turn it into this can cast spells, you obviously can't have it just shoot fireballs every single time. Or if you want to add ammunition, you say, okay, your ammunition is your charges, and I'm only going to give you kind of what I've done with like the Chardalyn arrows a little bit, where it's like, here's a crafting system, but I control as a DM how often you find the material or even the loot in general, or ammunition. And I don't usually like doing ammunition in a game, but in that case, it's not that you're trying to do ammunition for your basic auto attack. You're trying to specifically build ammo for a special magic item, and that becomes a lot more interesting because now you've given the players a finite supply of a thing where they still have to make that resource choice. And then I, as the DM, can literally control the economics of that supply and determining how often they find that kind of thing.
Which makes it, when they do find it, even more valuable. It's worth and like finding, basically.
It's a nice way to add to a loot table too, because you do want to be able to give the players cool stuff, but you don't necessarily want to give them just amazing magic items all the time. And I even probably spoil my players when it comes to giving away magic items. And at least if you do have some kind of like ammunition system, that's a way of kind of soft giving them additional tiny or pieces of loot rather than just more gold to throw on the pile. All right, are we at our final thoughts for using technology in our games? Let's start with reverse order. Lucas, what are your final thoughts for using tech, or best practices for using technology in D&D?
The first part is that the balance issue, because we know we live in a world of guns, and we know guns have supplanted melee weapons for a reason. But balancing it in a fantasy heroic setting of adventure is not the hard part. The hard part is feeling comfortable with the intrusion of this advanced technology when you want everyone to use swords and bows and arrows against their wizards and dragons. So if you can find whatever balance is comfortable for you, you can justify it. Like, hey, if you're, and like in Final Fantasy, VII, there are robots and cars and computers, but it's like, hey, if you're really good with a sword, you're as good as, if not better than, the guy with a gun. That's the rules of that world. So don't worry about you can't take a bullet and then shrug it off. Well, yes, you can. It's a game.
Yeah. You've seen how many hit. I mean, just to me, the equivalent, if anybody makes that argument, it's like, well, you also can't fall off a fucking like 3-story building and be like barely a scratch. Like the hit point thing doesn't make any sense in D&D in general, but that's a different argument. Brandon, final thoughts on using technology in D&D?
So I walked into this conversation feeling like I didn't have much experience to go off of, and being very anti-technology, that it just doesn't belong in my games, it doesn't belong in my world, and the times that it does, it really has to make sense. So talking about it, I could definitely be more open to it. And it's interesting because I catch myself being like, okay, well, rule of cool stuff, if we can flavor it and design it to where everybody seems like they're having fun, why do you have this hang up? And it's funny because even as I'm still sitting here, if somebody said, hey, I want a laser grenade that just shoots prismatic spray, right? Like we could make it make sense. It's not overpowered. I'm just like, Tell it to me more. Like,
Yeah.
tell me where it comes from, and tell me the background and how it got designed, like those things. And I think at the end of the day, if you're working with your players and they're able to come to you with an idea in mind and a way to keep everything moving forward and for it to make sense in your story, I don't see any reason why you should be like me and drag your feet and sandbag on the whole idea.
DM still has final word though. Genocider, final thoughts on technology.
Yeah, I'm with Brandon. Like I don't play in like a really, really super immersive kind of time period world game. So anything that you can reflavor as a spell or something else that's already in the books, I'm fine with being like a tech item. I think it's cool.
Agree. Lumpy Spuds, final thoughts on technology.
Yeah, I'd say don't be afraid of using it, but also be very, very wary. Some players will overuse it. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, that's a good point. If somebody's looking to get ahead, especially if they come in with like, a homebrew class or a third party thing, obviously you want to be looking over that stuff and try to see any discrepancies. But I think in general, people just want to have certain, archetypes or motifs they want to play as. Do I want to play as a Jedi, or I want to be a pirate or something that kind of has a certain level of gear or things about that. I want to be Batman with a bunch of gear versus shooting a bunch of spells and things. And like, we talked about it and Brandon mentioned, like, you can reflate. It'd be amazed what you can just reflavor in terms of balance. And then if you want to make it a super rare thing, you can. Obviously, if you want to shut that shit down and you'd be like, no, we're playing fucking Lord of the Rings ass fantasy, nobody's got even heard of that level of technology, that's totally fine. For me, and obviously I grew up with a lot of, to just standard high fantasy stuff, I think the addition of technology generally enhances my worlds. The ones that do play with technology, I tend to be really interested by, because I think it's always some added interest level about, why, how does technology exist alongside magic, and why, and why do certain factions use this or that? And just, to me, it makes it a little bit more interesting. That being said, I have not played a fantasy setting necessarily used it. I did play with Shadowrun a lot, which did do a cool blend of fantasy and magic, which I dug quite a bit. But I wouldn't have any problem with adding that, but it would have to be baked into the world. Or if it's just the character says, hey, I want to play this, then I would certainly want to work with that character and be able to reflavor those things. And there is precedent. Lumpy mentioned Expedition to the Barrier Peak, which I'm glad you said that, because I'm sure I'd get comments about that. That they have introduced these kind of things and played along with that in terms of rule of cool. Like, maybe you just find, similar to Rime. I think Rime might have been a little bit nodded to that, where it's just you find a downed spaceship and you can find all this advanced gear and you don't know how it works and you have to make all these checks and things, but that's just kind of a fun Easter egg. And at the end of the day, they become kind of just another magic weapon or a magic item tool. That's just, all the players are like nudge, nudge, like, oh shit, this is cool. And, you can kind of go with it from there. So I don't have typically any problem with it, but unless a player was specifically saying, oh, I want to try to get ahead by using all this, advanced weaponry, when in fact you can peruse the Dungeon Master's Guidebook and see that, and 1D&D even, they're really not that differently balanced compared to everything else. So at the end of the day, I think it's an issue of theming versus balance and immersion, certainly, depending on what you're looking to get. All right, I think that is going to do it for this month's DM Roundtable. Thank you to Brandon, Genocider, Lumpy, and Lucas for joining me, and thank you to all of the patrons. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Corey, Koa 1337, Big Nut, John, Chris, Scott, Gene, Eric, Sox, Dan, Tyler, Nathan, Camp, Crystal Lake, Counselor, Big Shep, Andrew. And gold patrons: RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuns, Jerome, Nathan, Fastica, Tortoise, Scott, Refus, Carolyn, and William. Thank you all very much for your support. Hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
Thanks for the conversation, folks.
Glad I can make it most of the time.
Yay!